Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 8th of October 2014, and joining me on this edition are Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
I don't know what the hell's in there, but it's weird and pissed off, whatever it is.
News Editor Mark Hodgkinson.
Maybe we at war with Norway.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
How long were you alone with that dog?
And Audio...
That's a good one.
and Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
First goddamn week of winter.
And it is. I've just put the central heating on. Welcome along to the weekly AVForums podcast. And before we go any further, we just have to mention that we are on holiday next week. So there will be no weekly podcast edition next week. Instead, you'll have the delights of the games team with the games edition of the podcast, and more on that a little bit later. And if you go looking for us next week, the short answer is we won't be there. So back to this week, and yet another slower than normal news week has passed us by, but we did get an invite, well, Steve did, along to London to spend some time with LG's TV engineers and find out about their plans for OLED TV in the next year. So donning his cape and deerstalker, our inquisitive reporter Steve Withers headed to the foggy slough in search of the elusive creature known as OLED.
And there were a bunch of them there, actually. I don't know quite...
What is the group name for OLED?
The collective noun for OLEDs.
Yeah.
A non-existent collection of OLEDs. Obviously, there were engineers from Korea there to talk to us about the benefits of OLED, which we know already. I mean, you know, we've been talking about OLED for how long, Phil? 5 years?
8 years.
Maybe. We were at the launch of their first OLED screens 2.5 years ago. We've reviewed 2 OLED screens. We know OLED's really good. Just, will you please make the damn things and put them in the shops at a reasonable price? That's all we really want. But it was interesting that they went through in some detail how they actually produce OLED panels, their approach compared to other people's approaches. No names, but you can guess who they were referring to. And you know, it looks as though, certainly from the way that they were speaking, that they have found a way of making OLED screens that they think is viable in terms of the number of the yields, which they said weren't as good as LCD panels, but were considerably better than they were before, and getting better. So their assumption is that, you know, they can produce decent sized numbers of these panels, and therefore hopefully sell them at a realistic price that will appeal to not just hardcore enthusiasts but the mass market in general. It looks as though their current... they also said they could retool LCD production facilities, which is, I guess, more economic from their point of view. I mean, one of the big problems with OLED has been, to get to this point, they've had to invest an absolute ton of money. And a lot of other manufacturers either aren't in the position to do that because they don't have the money. And I'm looking at the Japanese manufacturers.
Well,
really.
Well, Panasonic basically said that. Look, it's going to take a huge investment, and we're trying to get our TV division back in the black. So we won't be making that investment.
By producing televisions that don't do black.
Yeah.
More or less, but it makes some money. So, you know, you got to look at it from their point
so
of view.
they can't afford to invest. Samsung don't want to. For whatever reason, maybe because they sort of bet on a different approach and it didn't work out as well. And they certainly wouldn't. There's no way Samsung are going to use LG panels or LG technology. So whatever reason, the only manufacturer that's still heavily investing in OLED is LG, and you know, they are taking a bit of a gamble. You know,
but
if
are
it
they?
takes off, it could pay off really well for them. But it doesn't.
But are they? Are they taking a huge gamble because they're selling their panels to other manufacturers? So
yeah, certainly they mentioned to us that they were selling obviously to Chinese manufacturers, and that's a big market. So, you know, the 3 major Chinese manufacturers are all buying OLED panels from LG Display, who make the panels for everyone, including LG themselves, and are, I believe, and you can correct me on this one, Phil, but the biggest manufacturer of panels in the world now.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, there's certainly markets there, and in terms of pricing, you know, when you think that when OLED finally hit the shops, which would have been, I guess, about a year ago. You know, I know they said they had them in shops before that, but really in the shops, actually able to buy them in somewhere other than Harrods or something.
You mean someone like a DSG Group premises?
Yeah, quite. I think it was $6,999 when it first hit the stores. A 55-inch curved OLED, full HD, and that particular model can now be picked up for $2,000 in certain retailers. And that's
right. So would you risk your $2,000 on it?
Sorry.
Would you go and buy one?
I don't know. I mean, if I was buying a new TV, I maybe would. Yeah. I reviewed that TV. I thought it was excellent. I mean, it is a reference image, no question about it. And
yeah, but how long is it going to be a reference image, though?
Well, quite. in terms of lifespan, since you bring it up, Phil, the engineers said that they think that their approach to OLED means that they have a lifespan of an optimum performance of at least 30,000 hours. Maybe more like 50,000 when they're being used in things like movie mode or cinema mode, where they don't drive the panels as hard, which is a good reason for putting your TV in movie or cinema mode. And after that, they said they'll start to, that you might get some decay in terms of the, particularly blue, but in terms of the color accuracy. But certainly 30,000 to 50,000 hours, that's long enough for any TV to last. I mean, that's a significant time.
Yeah, if you believe the numbers there, because they don't have any hard data to back that up, do they?
You'd have thought so. I mean, they've been developing this for a number of years now. But they did say that in terms of image retention and screen burn, which again is something people are worried about, they did say maybe people have commented on seeing it perhaps on demo models, demo screens, this kind of stuff, where they've been playing the same thing over and over again for months. You might get some, but they said that with their new TVs, when you have it in standby mode, there's a screen wash feature that actually does stop it from developing any image retention or screen burn. So they seem confident that they'd last a long time and you wouldn't suffer from screen burn or image retention. You could say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But that's what their engineers said. They've got the latest version of, there's a later generation, if you like, of OLED is coming out anytime now. In fact, I think it's already available because I saw it advertised in Richer Sounds for about, I think it was $3,999, 55-inch full HD, with curved and with WebOS. And again, that's not an outrageous price for what is effectively new tech. In November, they'll be launching their 65-inch 4K OLED, curved again. That was originally mooted at sort of 5,999. It's actually going to be 6,499. Well, $6,500 is a lot of money, granted, but for 65-inch OLED, 4K OLED, not outrageous. And I mean, you could expect to see that price drop very significantly next year. And next year, of course, they'll also be launching 55-inch 4K and 77-inch, along with that bendable 77-inch TV, the one that can either be flat or curved, depending on your preference. But I should imagine that will not be cheap. So you could say that the sort of trying to convince us on the benefits of OLED, that was a bit pointless. We already knew that. I mean, so better black's obviously an infinite contrast ratio. When it goes black, it's completely black. Color accuracy is excellent. One interesting point they made was that the color accuracy in darker scenes is much better when compared to LCD, superior to LCD. And obviously, all the benefits that they were promoting were compared to LCD. I mean, there's no point really comparing it to plasma because plasma doesn't exist anymore as a new, as something you can buy in the shops. And a lot of their digs were obviously aimed at Samsung and their claims of being able to produce LCD panels that were superior to OLED. Maybe Panasonic as well.
I was going to say they're not the only ones. Panasonic are trotting that line as well, So, and until we see the 902, we've got to take what they're saying with a pinch of salt. But we've certainly seen what Samsung have got to offer this year, and they're mighty fine TVs, but I don't think they're anywhere near OLED, are they, Hodge?
No, they're not. I mean, they've all been very high standard, and just generally that they've been up their game this year with the LEDs from a decent start anyway. But no, they're not. They just can't. They haven't got the natural characteristics to match OLED, and it's all trickery to try and mimic, what OLED and plasma really can do. So no, they'll never get there.
I mean, for me, LCD has always been a flawed technology, and every new development with LCD has always been fix the flaws with that technology. So anything new that they bring out is usually a fix with a flaw that exists with the technology, and it baffles me that technology's won out and plasma's died a death.
It's because they're very good at taking those flaws and turning them into marketing attributes, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true. You get impressed with 1600 scanning rates and micro dimming pro and all this terminology. Like you say, it's just to get around the inherent weaknesses of it. So,
I mean, OLED, we're having to bank on LG at the minute if you're an enthusiast to push this market forward. They are selling their panels to other manufacturers who have yet to show their hand, and I would imagine CES onwards we might see some hands being shown with LG panels with other manufacturers' electronics on the back. But it's not just OLED panels that are being bought by other manufacturers. They seem to be changing their business models, especially the Japanese manufacturers, where they're just buying in the best they can find at the minute, Steve.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense, doesn't it, from an economic perspective? Why invest heavily and have your own production facilities to make the panels when you could just shop around and buy them from somebody else at less cost, and pick the ones that you like and that suit your needs. I mean, it's obviously what Toshiba, Panasonic,
Well, Samsung do it as well, don't they?
Yeah, well, they do it as well. I mean, everyone does it.
Most of their panels off AUO, don't they? So,
LG themselves will buy their panels from LG Display, who operates a separate company, right, Phil? So there's it's everyone does it. Why not? It makes perfect sense. I mean, having a facility, a massive factory making panels, is a risk to a certain extent. And interesting that TP Vision are building one in Taiwan to make their own panels, to give them the option, although they still wouldn't rule out buying from third parties themselves.
It is quite risky, especially the LG one, where if you stand on the roof, you can actually see North Korea. You're on the border.
Well, I mean, look at poor old Panasonic, how much they invest in plasma production facilities, and then some of them were never even used, were they?
That was the most impressive thing I've ever seen in my life when I visited that site. And the sad thing is that the majority of that site's now gone. It's been changed into other facilities, but it was so big that it had a motorway running through the middle of it. I mean, that just gives you an idea of the scale of this place. Unbelievable. But sadly, all gone now. And one of the new factories that I saw when I went out there, it only lasted a month or two after I'd been there. Maybe it's the curse of me going to these things. Maybe they shouldn't invite me out. But that was making IPS panels, and they closed that down and started buying IPS panels in.
A serious question, whilst we're on this sort of farming out and selling to other manufacturers. When you buy in one of these customer panels, I mean, is there any leeway at all for you to do anything to it? I mean, can it be attached to different picture processing systems?
Oh yeah, totally.
So
all they're doing.
So we would. It's not just a case of you can buy an LG TV or an LG TV with a different badge on it.
No. What all they're doing is buying the panel in. That's all they're doing. All they're doing is buying the panel. Everything else that drives that, all the electronics, all the video processing, everything else is that manufacturer's. So
it does set an important base level for performance, though, doesn't it? The particular panel.
It does, because if it's an IPS, it'll be good off axis, but it'll have shocking contrast ratio. Whereas if it's a UA, a VA panel, it'll have good black levels, but shocking off axis. And there's nothing that the manufacturers can do to get around those issues with the panels, but they can add their own picture processing and everything else into that, how they're going to drive the unit and so on.
Right. Okay. So it's not all bad then.
Oh no! I mean, that's why it makes perfect business sense. Yeah. To me,
it's actually a good idea. I think, ultimately.
You buy in the best panels, the best electronics and stuff, and you try to make the best out of that. And I think it could be quite successful for some companies that are currently deep in the red, and they might actually start making some money.
Well, I mean, we have to hope they do start making some money, because I'm assuming if they don't, they're liable to get shut down.
Well, I mean, you just have to look at Panasonic's CEO at the moment. He won't take any risks. So if something's not making money, and he's proven that with plasma, no, get rid of it. Not making money, get rid of it. Invest in something else.
Interestingly, the LG Korean engineers, we did ask about plasma. I said, what's the score there? And they said, yeah, we stopped producing them. We said, frankly, because we can't get components anymore. So, I mean, that's it now. I mean, plasma is totally dead in terms of anyone producing anything, because they said they actually did have a really good market for selling their plasmas into places like Brazil. They were very popular. And they would have happily continued making them for those kind of markets if they could find the components, but they can't. And I got the impression they buy a lot of their stuff off of Panasonic. Yeah. I think what they were, sort of inferring. So in terms of the whole visit, I mean, obviously we all understand the benefits of OLED. They showed us they had a curved OLED.
Well, hang on. You're saying that and you jump into assumptions there, Steve. I think
I did just describe the benefits.
Because you're thinking about it from an enthusiast's point of view. So let's ask Mark Botwright. Mark, how much exposure have you had to OLED, and what do you understand being the benefits of the technology?
Well, pretty much everything that's been said. The primary one, obviously, being black levels. But it seems like, I mean, because I've been doing this podcast for a while, that I've been kind of exposed to, a bit like radiation, high levels of for a long time. It's been on the horizon, and I think, just speaking as someone who's less inclined to run out to upgrade a screen quite so quickly, I think, well, I kind of got to applaud how LCD has kind of had this long tail, given the kind of deficiencies in its technology. The fact that, as has been said, virtually everything that can be tacked on to kind of make up for a deficiency has been marketed in such a way that most people generally do think that plasma was just an outdated technology.
Yeah, very true.
What was interesting in the demos, and this is to LG's credit, I think, is they had one of their curved OLED screens next to two curved Ultra HD. So it was a full HD curved OLED against two Ultra HD curved LCD panels. They didn't mention the manufacturers, but you could kind of see. And they also had one of their flat OLEDs, taking out the ones that come in that gallery with the picture frame, with the speakers in the picture frame. They took it off the picture frame, obviously, and just put that on the wall. So it was a flat OLED Full HD against two flat Ultra HD 4K TVs. And whilst, the images, they were being fed Full HD images. So on the Ultra HD, you kind of got perception in more detail because of the high resolution panel and the degree of sort of processing and sharpening that they bring to that. But I've got to say, in terms of image quality, I much preferred, obviously, the look of the OLED screen because it just looked so much better. The images would look better, the blacks, the dynamic range, the color accuracy. It was vastly superior in that sense, and you really could see the difference. And then when we had a chance to actually see a 4K OLED, the 465 inches coming out next month, with 4K content, it was absolutely stunning. And you really think, this is, I think for any enthusiast, that's the holy grail of television technology at the moment. Whether LG can then get the mass market and the average consumer to buy into OLED is a different question entirely, because there's going to be some confusion out there after spending the last 5 years telling that they've been buying LED TVs.
Yeah, and I guess that's the position as a vendor, LG Display position as vendor is quite important there, because the more manufacturers they get it out to, the more names they get it out to, I guess the consciousness spreads, doesn't it?
Yes. And from our perspective, competition is always good too. You don't want just one manufacturer dominating, because then you won't get price reductions. Ed, you've been quiet.
Well, yes, there's a degree of rod for its own back in terms of the casual interchangeability of LED and OLED is going to prove a problem, especially when there's only one manufacturer going, hang on, there is actually a difference. And if anyone else doesn't want to bother with OLED, they'll go, no, not at all. Especially as it's further blurred by people going to the effort and monumental pointlessness of making curved LEDs. But I still anticipate, however naively, that the replacement for my current television will be an OLED set. If it has to be an LG one, then so be it. But we'll see what comes of it. I think it's going to be interesting, in as much that I'm intrigued to hear that there's already one of the original LG OLED is down to 2K in terms of pricing, because it struck me as an opportunity for television manufacturers to actually try and build something and retain a degree of margin on it, which isn't necessarily great news in an immediate sense for us as consumers, but it's actually good news in so much as it allows them to continue and to make money and to produce products which are strive to be excellent, and not strive to hit a certain price point and get hacked to death in the process of having that price point further reduced. And it would appear that for whatever reason that's already not happening. So we'll have to see how it goes. If it's reduced to being another zero margin product and it's much more effort than making an LED television, it, broadly speaking, is doomed.
Yeah, I guess that's a valid point. I think, as Phil said earlier, CES will be interesting to see what LG have on offer, but also how many other manufacturers jump on the bandwagon.
I guess the other thing we've got to look at here is why did plasma fail? Plasma was the best picture quality, so why were the public not rushing out and buying plasma TVs for the best picture quality?
Well, they couldn't go as bright in the showroom, for one thing, and they didn't look as cool, which OLED's got. It can do both, can't it? It can go as bright as LED or brighter, and can look cooler. But
you can curve an LED LCD TV, you can make it look thin, you can have a nice design on that, so why are you going to pay the extra for an OLED? Are the public going to pay for picture quality?
They haven't done so far, have they?
Even though in all those market research questions, they always seem to put picture quality as a top thing. It's like, most important thing. Yeah, when it comes down to it, it's the price. Price is really important. And I think that ultimately will be how OLED wins or loses. If LG and whoever else makes them can get the price at the right point, then they'll be fine. But and get the message across. You're right, Phil. There's no point telling enthusiasts or us how good OLED is. You need to tell the average consumer how good OLED is, and get across the fact it's got better blacks and a wider dynamic range, and more accurate colors and wider viewing angles and faster response times, and somehow get that across as a message. Although I guess, it is, when you see one, they look great. I mean, there's certainly no question when you put it next to any other TV, you could clearly see against the LCD TVs they were against it last week, where they had things like, on WebOS, they got the little cursor thing, well, against a black background. There was obvious haloing around that cursor on the LCD panels. And of course, with the OLED, it was pitch black and then just a clear, sharp cursor. Those kind of things do stand out pretty quickly when you do a side-by-side comparison. So it's interesting to see how they make them, because that's something that perhaps we haven't covered in much detail in the past.
Magic, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Difficult, I think, is the answer. And their approach and how it differs from the answers approaches. And it certainly sounds like they feel, at least, that they've got a way of doing it that is viable and can support a mass market product. So, I think from that perspective, I came away from that meeting feeling quite enthusiastic about it and optimistic about the future of OLED in a way that perhaps I wasn't before.
But you are an enthusiast.
True. I'm hopelessly biased. And
I have real concerns for it, and my concerns stem from the same concerns I have for Dolby Atmos. It's selling it to the public and it's getting it in front of the public, and we discussed this last week with projectors. Public have they don't really have a view on projectors because they haven't had one demonstrated to them properly. And I think if more people see the technology, more people's going to. But are the general public going to be interested? This is my concern. And when you're talking about things like 4K and so on, what's going to make them buy a 4K OLED over a 4K LCD TV?
Well, that comes down to, at the end, it comes down to the point of sale, doesn't it? So much of this is dependent
better
on
margin on the LCD then.
Well, why did plasma fail? Partly because I think retailers seem to push LCD more than they did plasma, and there was all this bullshit about regassing and screen burn and all this kind of stuff, and negative comments about plasma in stores, which I've heard people say, you've heard people say in stores. It seemed to me as though the retailers were deliberately pushing one technology over the other. Why? I'm not quite sure. Maybe there was more margin in it for them. And that's another reason why plasma didn't succeed in the way it should have, given its superiority in terms of picture quality. Okay,
let's move things along then. So you're either going to go out and buy a big screen OLED or a big screen 4K LED TV or a projector. Where are you going to sit? Is the big question, and let's go to Hodge with this one. Hodge, where are you going to sit to get the best viewing experience?
Bang in the middle, as close as possible. That's always been my philosophy now. Joking about, that is the best place, the position that fills your field of view the most, where you can sit in comfort and you're centrally aligned. So, joking about that is where. But Steve produced an article over the weekend with some actual data. Where was that first graph from, Steve? Was that a THX one or?
I don't think it was actually THX. It was just some research body had done some research into just viewing angles, distances. I think generally, though, I did research, what THX were recommending, and they all kind of followed the same basic guidelines. So there was
they're all the same. If you look at SMPTE, THX, ITU, they all have the same viewing distances, viewing angles, and so on, which is all interesting stuff. But the thing is that most living rooms ain't going to be laid out perfectly like that.
No.
And unless you have a dedicated room where you could put the seating where it should be to get the most from the resolution and from the screen size and so on, it's a bit hit and miss. But it's nice to give some guidelines, because then I guess people can mix and match and try and put the seating in the best possible position for A, the display, and B, the technology. Because I'm thinking, well, if you've got an LCD TV, and if it's not an IPS panel, the last place you want to be sitting is off axis, off to one side with something like that. So it's not just your viewing distance, it's viewing angles and so on as well. So that's up on the front page at the minute. Ed, does this apply to speakers nowadays? Is there still advice being given out where you should be sitting between two speakers and so on? And
well, yes. Stereo still hasn't changed radically in this regard, and I mean, the only variants that we get in stereo that televisions, well, I don't know actually. With curved ones, who knows? It might be changing. Obviously, with speakers, that all points of the triangle are flexible. You can both move the speakers inboard and outboard, and then also adjust the level of toe in on them as well. So you get more flexibility to create that triangular point. If you like, the triangle is reversed,
You see, ask a simple question of a hi-fi nut and they'll give you a really long, complicated answer.
Ultimately, we've got it easier than television people. Both speakers, even when they're big, are easy enough to move around, and then they can also rotate on their own axis, which means that you get more flexibility to create a listening position. But generally speaking, the one thing it does have in common is don't fire down the corner of a room. That just doesn't work desperately well. Or hide a speaker behind the sofa in the same way that doesn't work very well for a television.
And of course, Hodge, the important thing here that we seem to be missing out, and we should always mention it first of all straight away, is the room itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to have the biggest impact almost on your viewing. And we did something on bias lighting as well at the same time Steve's piece went up. And it's the importance of getting the comfortable and neutral lighting in your room. So bias lighting is it's an ambient lighting for your viewing room that goes behind the display specifically. So hence the name bias, I believe. And
no, that is bias lighting and not biased lighting, as Steve has written in.
I put biased in there.
Lighting with an agenda. So it was, I mean, I've been using it for years. I'm sure you. Is everyone using it here?
Yeah, I mean, I've got one right now, right behind the monitor that I'm looking at, so it stops my eye from straining because
it's a really cheap way of upgrading your TV's picture. It's good for your eyes. It relaxes your eyes because your pupils aren't constricting and dilating constantly with the changes of on-screen content. It makes your TV look better. It tricks you, fools your eyes into thinking blacks are a bit deeper.
Yeah, your LCD TV's actually got some blacks.
Actually, it's good, yeah. And it can be done, you can spend thousands, you can spend hundreds, you can spend just a few quid, experiment with cheap bulbs from the likes of B&Q, aim for something that's got a daylight D65 type rating.
Well, I've actually got to say, Tesco, they do their own brand LED light. It comes in a grey plastic container, and it is bang on D65.
There you go.
And
so how much is that?
£9 a bulb.
There you go. I'm going to stick that in the article, actually. I didn't realise you have a specific example. But I've been just using something from B&Q, which is very close to D65. It cost me $8.95 or something a couple of years ago. And it's it's a fantastic picture upgrade, and everyone should do it. There is no excuse. If you can fit a light behind it. You can even buy strips of lighting, so if you've got no room on your cabinet behind it, you can affix them to the back of the panel.
Now, Philips have been doing this for years. They've been doing Ambilight. Now, there are some differences here, people. With Philips, and correct me if I'm wrong because they may have changed the technology, but you can just switch it to a white colour and leave it like that, yes?
You can, yes.
Yes, that's what you should be doing, people.
Definitely.
Do not put it on nightclub mode.
It's like these dynamic modes that react to the...
they had one at the press conference this year at IFA, and no word of a lie, I was pissing myself laughing at it because it looked like the Ministry of Sound. It was unbelievable. No, that's not bias lighting.
It's impressive technically if you want to show off to your friends, but do not sit watching TV.
So you're saying that you can't stick Christmas lights behind then?
No.
Not if they flash. You don't want anything flashy. You don't want anything that is going to affect the eye. So you want something that's on constantly all the time and is a neutral colour. So that's why we say D65. It's like sunlight. That's technically where sunlight would be. So not too yellow, not too blue, kind of just right.
Yeah. Goldilocks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what scientists call the Earth's orbit, isn't it? The Goldilocks zone. Yeah. So there you go. It's a nice neutral colour behind the display, and like Mark says, if you've got a shit LCD TV, it suddenly looks all right.
Yeah, half decent for a tenner.
There you go. OLED's going to be killed by a £9 Tesco bulb. You heard it here first.
Well, we're full of good consumer advice on the AVForums podcast these days. Sort of sowing message.
It's virtually public broadcasting, isn't
it? Don't push it.
It's something, Mark. I don't know what it is. It's hard to explain.
It is.
So, Ed, does biased lighting help with sound quality?
But I've said before that I'm sort of affected, and a number of other reviewers have made mention of it in the past. Certain turntables, and there are other bits of equipment where it matters as well, certain bits of equipment are sufficiently visually distracting that they affect your perception of how they sound. So you can actually only appraise them with any degree of accuracy when they're squirreled away out of your sight line.
Yeah, and scientifically that is bang on, because you put anything behind a acoustically transparent material and you can't tell where it's positioned in the room. Fantastic way of assessing stuff then, because you're not looking at where the sound's coming from, or you're not looking where something is. You're not looking at the product. Big fan of that theory. I believe it 100%.
Sure. I mean, it's just certain turntables are just so, they are, busy whirring away in front of you. They are massively distracting things. And valve amplifiers are much the same as well. They're glowing and doing all manner of stuff. So yeah, simply removing them from your sight line. I mean, there's a lot of arguments that people make that not having your electronics between your speakers has sound benefits, and depending on how appallingly I suppose it's shielded, I suppose that's just about possible. But certainly taking it out of your sight line does have other psychoacoustic properties, I think is the really pretentious phrase. So yeah, there are definite bonuses to doing it that way.
And is there still bonuses to colouring in your CDs with a green marker pen?
No,
put them in the freezer.
Or putting them in the Oralex CD toaster. All of these things and more are a complete waste of time and money. So yeah, sorry to.
Yeah, but some people have gotten incredibly rich on the back of some of that stuff, haven't they?
Oh no! As I say, it's a free country. I don't. I'm not. Ban this sick filth. If you genuinely feel it makes your life better, then just knock yourself out. Just don't ask me to take you seriously when you do it. Simple as that.
Right, let's wrap up on the hardware with some upcoming reviews. So, games-wise, what have we got coming, Mark?
Well, Manny's FIFA 15 review's just gone up. James's feature on what is retro has also just hit the site. Steve is doing a little article about the Destiny features we'd like to see, and hopefully by the time this poddy goes up, Niall's F1 2014 preview on the PC will be up, and Steve will be stuck into Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor on the PS4. Okay,
and Steve, what have you got coming up?
I've got another projector from Optoma, the GT 1080, which is basically aimed more at the gamers. Mark, Botwright. It's a really sort of gaming projector, so ideal, I guess, low input lag, 1080p resolution, but that very bright. I'm getting that this week to review. And on Thursday, I shall be at the sort of a demonstration press launch for Trinov Audio's Altitude 32 preamplifier and processor. This is an Auro 3D and Dolby Atmos processor, which hopefully we'll also be getting in for review. And this is basically the sort of the nuts of processors with 32 potentially 32 channels in total, and includes both styles of immersive surround sound.
So that's a real niche market there of single men with plenty of money and plenty of room to shove speakers.
Yeah. If you're using one of these, it's definitely going into a custom install with you could do, I think it's something like 12 overhead speakers if you wanted to. So 2 rows of 6.
After you, I think is the phrase. Is the phrase that swings immediately to mind with that.
If you got the room and the money, I'm sure it'd be absolutely awesome. But yeah, it's going to be fairly niche. But anyway, that'd be interesting. Just hearing it and set up and getting a chance to play around with it. And hopefully we'll get that in for review for those of you who have a shed load of money, or just like reading reviews of really expensive stuff like AV porn, which, let's be honest, we all do.
I'm sorry, that's just created a horrible image in my mind.
Rule 32.
Right, Mark, what have you got?
I got a couple of Samsung 1080p TVs, Yoli 1080p, an H7000 46-inch, and another one. 6 series, 40-inch, 6,400, I think, H6400. There's so many of them. Sorry, there are so many.
They should market them as that. Ye oldie 1080p TVs.
Yes.
With wood surrounds. Start putting them on.
And free Atari VCS.
Big whirly tuning dials.
Well, I did see a PS4 made out to look like an old Atari with a fake wood and stuff the other day, Mark. That looked quite nifty, retro
I'd
style.
buy that.
Yeah, I'd buy it.
Right, and Ed, what are we expecting at the end of the month?
Last day of the month.
Last day of the month. Well, you've obviously got my clutch of reviews that I actually handed in last night to come. So there'll be.
You spoke about that last week. Don't try and get out of it.
Yeah. Next up is I will now finally be getting round to my thoughts on Yamaha's AX3040 Atmos receiver. The review may or may not contain an actual test of Atmos. It depends if I can summon up the mental fortitude to watch Transformers. So, given
has the upgrade firmware update gone through yet?
It's supposed to happen imminently. So
yes.
We'll see how we go from there. There's the weirdly named and strangely wonderful Noble Kaiser K10 earphone, which I briefly mentioned last week. I can now mention the brand. That is yours for £1,000. And I will try and pick through the thorny issue of earphones that cost 4 figures and work out where you need to sit in the sanity roster for that one. And then I'm supposed to do an article, and no one has responded to our pleas last week for something for me to write about. So you have any thoughts? It's like think about like setting a child a punishment essay. 2,000 words on the inside of a ping pong ball. I stress I'm not going to write 2,000 words on the inside of a ping pong ball, but if you've got something that you'd like me to talk about, I'll boom tish. See what it is, and there will undoubtedly be something else that blows my frock up that I will try and review for you this month. I've actually was saying I arrived a bit sort of sweaty and unkempt, or more sweaty and unkempt than usual at the start of this podcast, because I'm busy changing over my listening room, which will mean it is easier to get review speaker packages in and out. So hopefully I can increase the number of those that I do as well. So we'll see where we go from there.
I'm just trying to think of a feature suggestion.
Well, don't do that. I think it's something to talk about in the games, because I'm coming to you next.
Oh, crap.
Moving on to games news for this week, and I've got a funny feeling there isn't much, Mark, because you will be recording the games podcast hopefully at some point this week. It goes out next Tuesday on the 14th. Will be the only podcast that goes out next week, so you've got the whole week to yourself. So what are we likely to find within the games podcast?
I hadn't expected that question. Watch this space. I think is the best we can say at the moment.
You know what? You do one a month. You got a whole month to plan these things.
But we're still finalising the running
Do they
order.
sound like they're planned?
Cutting.
I mean, I'm not saying this is planned either, by the way. Clearly.
Well, this clearly isn't planned, but there you go.
I thought we were going
to do 4 of them.
Yeah. I thought we were going to talk about the Room Alive thing.
I don't know what that is.
What's that?
Me and you then, Mark.
The link that Hodge sent.
No, Hodge sent out that link.
Yeah, and then I replied and said, yes, I think that would be a good idea.
It was the world's most expensive whack-a-mole system, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
6 projectors mounted up on the roof to create an augmented.
So this sounds as viable as Atmos then.
Well, you mix it with Atmos and you're going to have some real fun. So there's six roof-mounted. Mark's supposed to be doing this bit, but anyway, 6 roof-mounted projectors, all with their own Kinect sensors that creates like this augmented reality room. Microsoft have been working on this for years, haven't they, Mark? With they said they were ditching it, didn't they? Actually, originally.
I've just seen a couple of photographs pop up on my Twitter feed at this moment in time.
Well, it's kind of falls in line with what we were talking about with bias lighting. Originally,
slightly.
In what
There are
way?
lights involved.
No.
Well, there's a bunch of cheap
because
involved, so that's handy.
if you'll let me finish,
Sorry.
thank you. No, it's simply because this came out of their Illumiroom idea. Microsoft research, they were looking into kind of things to do with the Kinect sensor. And originally it was like a projected image onto the wall around, and it created ambient lighting. It could be to do with, what was going on in the game. Things could be projected into the room. And so they've kind of taken that idea and kind of just bolted on as many different cameras and projectors as possible to create this 360-degree space.
So basically they've invented this Kinect, and it's like, what the f*** are we going to do with this thing?
Yeah.
Yes, but there again, it's good that they're doing this, because, I mean, even though neither seems to be ever likely to hit retail, it's kind of what all, mega corporation tech R&D is, which is it's seen as superfluous in the interim, but at a given point, it will kind of underpin the consumer technology of tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd agree. But it does look crap, doesn't it? I mean, it's the worst looking game I've ever seen.
Well, the thing is, as soon as you stand in front of the projector to whack something, you cast a shadow and the thing disappears.
No, because there'd be other projectors at different parts of the room that would.
Well, not in the photograph I'm looking at. Oh, she's casting a huge bloody shadow over the whole game.
There is that problem. There will be. It's designed to be overlapping, obviously, so that you can get this kind of surround image. But yes, there is that minor issue, and the fact that you have to kind of rig it up to a joist along with your Atmos speakers if you want, and reinforced girders in your ceiling. And obviously, that's so that you can get it surrounded, and obviously also so that you don't turn around and stare straight into a projector and blind yourself.
I think they're really pushing this niche with a single bloke that's able to do this in his house.
Just go to Laser Quest.
Yeah, basically.
Is that the games news?
That's games news.
What's at the cinema, Steve?
This week it's Gone Girl, the new film from David Fincher, based upon the best-selling novel of the same name. And this is a biting satire on the nature of modern media and the internal workings of a failing marriage, with a twist-laden kidnapping murder mystery plot thrown in for good measure. And I've got to say, I really, really enjoyed it. Ben Affleck stars in it as a husband whose wife, played by Rosamund Pike, disappears. There's a police investigation into it. And I don't want to give too much away, but basically there's a story, the investigation into her disappearance, and coupled with diary entries she's made about how their relationship evolved from when they first met up to the point of her disappearance. And then things go off at a tangent. It's great. It's really, really fun. The plot's kind of very Hitchcockian in the sense that you've got lots of twists and turns, and suddenly the whole plot takes a different turn, and a very interesting ending. What I will say is, if you're going to go and see it with your girlfriend or wife and your relationship isn't particularly solid, don't go, because it really makes some very pointed comments about relationships and marriage, and there was a lot of knowing laughter in the audience at some points. But I personally thought it was great. The cast is very good. Fincher, as always, direction's impeccable. It looks gorgeous. It's beautifully shot. It's an 18 certificate, which is unusual these days, and for a couple of reasons. There's some sex scenes and a very graphic murder, and a bit of strong language. But I personally really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was excellent. It was very thought-provoking. Came away from it at the end. I think Kaz was a little harsh. I think he may have missed the point slightly in his review. He gave it 7 out of 10. I'd give it more like 8 or 9 out of 10. I thought it was one of the best ones I've seen this year in terms of both enjoyment and plot-wise. And yeah, like I said, if you're a fan of Fincher, go and see it. If you're a fan of the book, you want to go and see it. The book and the movie's ending is slightly different, apparently. I haven't actually read the book, though. And, if you just want to see an enjoyable sort of mystery thriller with some very cutting comments about modern life thrown in for good measure, go and see it. But if you're going with your girlfriend or wife and you're not getting on at the moment, don't. Go on your own. Unless you want to come out of the cinema and get divorced straight afterwards.
Well, if you're not getting on in the first place, then you won't be getting the pictures, will you?
Probably true. Yeah, probably. Maybe you think I'll go to the movies as a way of trying to salvage our relationship. Right, it won't work.
It's a good marketing line, though. Take your wife and leave alone.
It's very, and I've got to say, Rosamund Pike is very good in it. In what I think probably for her is easily the biggest role she's ever had, and certainly her best performance. She's great. But it's a brilliant film. There are lots of really good plot twists, some of which you might see coming, but some of which you won't. It's David Fincher. You can't go wrong with it. I love Fincher. I think he's great, and I know it would be a fantastic Blu-ray when it comes out too. It would help if people went to the movies other than just me, because then we could sort of discuss it.
I do go to the movies, but I only watch kids' movies.
Yeah.
That could be a new feature.
So if I was covering box trolls, we'd be fine, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we'll be up there. We're going to that the weekend.
Is that it? Is that the whole movies thing?
Yeah. Well, no, that's the cinema bit.
You sound disappointed, Mark.
Well, usually it's my time for a pee break.
Well, I can't say too much without giving away plot points. I don't want to. So.
All right, so let's move on to Blu-rays released next week. Edge of Tomorrow, The Other Woman, Penny Dreadful Season 1, and the Steven Spielberg Collection. Tell us about them.
Penny Dreadful? Did I write that wrong?
No.
Dreadful? No.
Sorry, Dreadful. Sorry.
Edge of Tomorrow is the Tom Cruise star that came out early in the summer. Basically, it's Groundhog Day meets Starship Troopers with Emily Blunt thrown in for good measure, so you can't really go wrong there. I should say I really enjoyed it. It's basically a guy who keeps dying and repeating the same sort of day of his life over and over again within this war. It's exciting, it's fun, it's clever, it's quite funny in places. It uses the sort of the repeated sequence very effectively. It's a bit like, it's not dissimilar to playing a video game in the sense when you get killed and you respawn, and does that quite cleverly. It's probably the closest I've seen to a film capturing how it is to play a game sometimes. But it's a really good movie. Tom Cruise is very good in it. Emily Blunt's very good in it. The effects are great. Direction by Doug Liman's excellent. I think it'll probably be a fantastic Blu-ray. So probably worth picking up next week.
And you can win a copy on the AVForums.
That's why we were talking about it last week, wasn't it? Yes.
Oh, this was one of our many It's All Right Blu-rays, is it?
Well, no, this was not the one I said. I said this was really good. It was the It's All Right. It's a bit of a ropey selection of Danny Boyle movies that we were learning about.
So anyway, Edge of Tomorrow, you can win that. Next one.
The Other Woman, which is a comedy with Cameron Diaz, and basically it's about a woman who's having a relationship with a man, but discovers he's married, ends up becoming friends with his wife, and then they find he's having an affair with another woman, and they become friends, and the three of them sort of join together to get the revenge on him for being such a philandering git. I actually say quite enjoyed it at the cinema. Went to see it with the girlfriend, and I mean, initially I thought it might be a bit of a chick flick, but actually it was really funny. It hasn't had great reviews from other people, but personally, I think it's well worth seeing, if only for Kate Upton, who's got a magnificent set of Bristols. Penny Dreadful, Season 1. I watched this on Sky when it was on a couple of months ago. I got to say, I really enjoyed it. It's by John Logan, who co-wrote Skyfall, I believe, produced by Sam Mendes. And John Logan wrote the entire series, so it's very consistent. And it's kind of taking literary characters from Victorian fiction, like Dracula and Frankenstein and King Solomon's Mines and various other characters like this, and then having them exist in a fictional world whereby they all come together. It's not dissimilar in that respect to, I think, Alan Moore's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and it's done in an enjoyably over the top Victorian Gothic way, which I quite enjoyed. And it's got a good cast. It's got Timothy Dalton, Eva Green, Josh Hartnett. Worth seeing, I think, if you haven't seen it on TV already. And it was beautifully shot, so it'll probably look very nice on Blu-ray. And then finally, the Steven Spielberg Collection, which comes out next week, which includes a number of his famous films that are already available on Blu-ray, such as Jaws and E.T., but also includes 4 films that aren't available yet. So unfortunately, to get the 4 films you want, you have to buy a box set of all the films you've already got. But it's got Duel, Sugarland Express, the longer cut of 1941, and Always. And those 4 films have not, up until now, been available on Blu-ray. So I'm planning on picking up for that reason alone.
Duel is just fantastic.
Duel's fantastic. Sugarland Express is okay as a first feature by a director. Always is a remake of a film called A Guy Named Joe, which is okay. 1941, I'm quite looking forward to seeing again because it's his one big flop, and but it has got a cast including John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and various other people. So I think it's worthy of reappraisal, particularly on Blu-ray. So I'm quite looking forward to getting that next week.
I was just thinking, Penny Dreadful, isn't that still on Sky On Demand?
Yes, you can still watch it.
I mean, obviously, I know you'll get better picture on Blu-ray, and if you desperately want to watch
a lot of these TV series box sets, you can watch for nothing on Netflix or watch on Sky or things. I mean, whether you buy them or not is down to if you're like Simon who refuses to stream anything, or you want the slightly better picture quality of Blu-ray. Obviously, it is going to be superior in terms of picture and sound. And certainly, it was a show that I think would benefit from being on Blu-ray.
It was quite good. I mean, I just kept on watching it and thinking that just Eva Green badly needed a sandwich. But yeah, it was pretty good. I thought. I mean, the problem is that Timothy Dalton looked a little bit too much like he did in Hot Fuzz. which was a problem in so much as I kept on assuming he was going to do something villainous but hilarious at a given point. But that subsided after a couple of episodes, and I thought it was pretty jolly good. I enjoyed it.
I have nothing to say on any of those because I've not seen any.
This is because we're recording in the afternoon. You have your nap a bit now, don't you?
I am on the bed. Let's put it. I'm quite comfortable. Pretty comfy right now. But no, I haven't seen any of those. Well, I did start with Penny Dreadful, like I say, but I was in the wrong frame of mind and it was very late at night, so I just never renewed it. I might go back and get it on Now TV if it's still there.
There you go, another glowing endorsement of what's out there on the market from the AVForums team.
We should change our badges. Indifferent, meh, and it's passable.
AVForums, meh.
Meh. Or, high praise, it earns a... But no, as I say, I'm looking forward to the 100th episode of Wheeler Dealers this evening. That's going to be good. It's doing a car which is 100 years old, which is going to be most entertaining, I suspect.
I haven't seen any of this series. I can't bring myself to pay money to Sky.
Have you turned into Withers? Do you have a little Rupert Murdoch voodoo doll?
No.
Actually, I'm saying all this, and obviously I've completely disconnected and powered off my Sky HD box before putting it. And there's always that slight moment of excitement with that when you plug it back in again as to whether it's actually going to turn back on again or just become a pointless little plastic paperweight. So, I may or may not join you in 24 hours. We'll see how we go.
Right, so before we're sidetracked there, those are the Blu-rays that are released next week, and let's move on to our final little topic for this week, which Steve has mentioned for a few months now in the running order, and we've just ignored it, but sadly we've got nothing else on the running order to talk about, so we're going to have to do it. Best movie remakes, over to you, Steve.
I think one of the reasons this came up was because Mr. Botwright was asking if we could do quotes from John Carpenter's remake of The Thing, which is what we have been quoting from in this week's podcast. And no question about it, The Thing, his version of The Thing, is vastly superior to the film it was the original Thing's fun. Thing from Another World, as it was actually called, is a fun film, but it's basically about a giant man-eating carrot going around an ice this base in Alaska, in Antarctica. Whereas Carpenter's film is very much more based upon the actual original short story of who goes there, but also has the most amazing creature effects by Rob Bottin. And at the time, it bombed hugely. It came out the same summer as E.T., which killed it dead. But I think since then it's been reevaluated, and it is now considered to be an absolute classic, one of the great horror films of all time. And certainly one of the best remakes of all time, a film that's vastly superior to the original film and changes it and improves on it in every conceivable way. It's got a great cast, a completely male cast, which is unusual, and particularly Kurt Russell is fantastic as MacReady in the lead role. But everyone in it's good, and a really good cast of character actors. And I believe Mr. Botwright's one of our favourite films, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. In fact, I only read Who Goes There quite recently, and I was a little bit shocked to see just how much closer Carpenter's vision stays to the story. I'd always assumed, because obviously the original film was much closer in period to when the short story was written, that those would be the ones that, should we say, kind of converged, and that Carpenter had added in the kind of, the horror aspect of it a bit more, and that took a little bit more license with it. But yeah, as I say, I was pleasantly surprised to see just how close it kept to not just plot points, but it really kind of got the essence of the story, which was about paranoia and about what makes you human and how you can tell that from an imitation. Yep, I absolutely love the film, just because I think there's a sad lack of synth in modern films. If you want something dystopian, if you want something kind of, bleak, add in a decent bit of synth, and then that usually does the trick for me.
So then what do you make of the remake of the remake?
I haven't seen it.
Well, it's a remake / prequel, and it's awful, because it's just...
How do you define a remake? I mean, there's the point. I mean, they're both from the same source material, so is it just a reinterpretation?
It is essentially it is meant to be a prequel, so it takes place before the Carpenter film, and it ends effectively with where the Carpenter film begins. So it is a prequel, but in terms of structure, it's essentially a shot-by-shot remake of of the thing, with the same, except this time, there's a female protagonist rather than a male protagonist, but everyone else is male. And that's the only real major difference. Otherwise, there's lots of the same things, with obviously people being taken over by the thing and then having these mutations and turning into other creatures. But essentially, it is a remake in the guise of a prequel. That's what it effectively is.
So it's almost like kind of Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 syndrome, where it's kind of
yeah. That's a sequel that is a remake masquerading as a sequel, isn't it? And in that case, would class as a great remake, in fact, because Evil Dead 2 is brilliant. There's lots of great. There's an awful lot of remakes where they've taken a foreign film and made an English language version of it, and quite often that can be successful. Certainly, A Fistful of Dollars, which is a remake of Yojimbo, the Kurosawa movie. There's also Magnificent Seven, which again is a remake of Seven Samurai by Kurosawa. I've always been quite partial to Martin Scorsese's version of, his film The Departed is a remake of a Hong Kong movie called Infernal Affairs, although I think Infernal Affairs ultimately is a superior film, but Departed is a good remake.
12 Monkeys.
Yeah, has anyone seen Le Jetée?
No.
But,
bless you.
I like Philip Kaufman's remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers 1978, which has got the bit with the dog with the man's head on it, which is awesome. Really, really unnerving. I thought the Coen Brothers remake of True Grit was pretty good as well.
Yes, actually, that's.
Oh yeah, that was good. I like that.
I would definitely say David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly is vastly superior to the original film.
Now you see, but what you're hitting, there's something you're hitting on here, which is that, with a very few noble exceptions, horror movies, unless they were ones based around what you didn't. Something which was a monster movie was fundamentally schlocky and pretty embarrassing, and right up until the point where the effects and visual rather than CGI reached a point where it just became they reached a level of plausibility. So in what The Thing and The Fly have in common is that with 1950s man in a big rubber suit syndrome, there's only so much that they could realistically do, and then that they benefit from the magic happening when the level of effects and what can be done with them it improves. I would also concede in both cases that direction, acting, and the rest of it improve with it, but I would say it was easier to act off against something which is visually unsettling than it is against an extra in a big rubber suit.
That's a fair point. There's a degree of truth to that. I do think that The Thing in particular does benefit from actually going back to the source material and being closer to it and maintain that sense of paranoia, which is funny because you thought it would have been ideal for the 1950s when paranoia was so rampant and everyone was looking for reds under the bed and that kind of stuff. But for example, of a film, not a horror film or a science fiction film, but where I think the remake, again, benefited from more lax modern morals perhaps, is the remake of Scarface by De Palma, which retains essentially the same plot as the 1930s Scarface of Paul Muni, but obviously throws in, rather than being a Italian gangster in New York, it's a Cuban gangster in Miami with shed loads of cocaine, drugs, sex, violence, and tons of swearing, and an over-the-top performance from Al Pacino. That,
I can see why you like it.
Love it. Yeah, it's brilliant. But I remember when it came out. It was a massive backlash against it because it was accused of being incredibly violent and everything like that. And of course, by today's standards, it's pretty tame.
Yeah, but there was another same kind of protest at Wolf of Wall Street as well, saying it was glorifying.
Yeah.
That kind of lifestyle.
Yep, absolutely. And Wolf of Wall Street does to a certain extent, and the protagonist doesn't really sort of gets away with it as well. But if it's funny and it works, what's the problem? I don't mind the fact that he's an abhorrent character or that they glorify something. Ultimately, I found it very funny, and that was, I think, the point.
There is one which I have to say I've seen both by accident. I saw the remake first, and then during a particularly slow day, actually literally about a year ago when my son was born, and I couldn't do very much. 3:10 to Yuma. Now, I think I have to say, having seen the original, that's by no means a bad film, but I do think the remake is better. I think that's a very effective reimagining, and actually, what I was saying about props and stuff, that doesn't necessarily bear true with that. I think it's just a tighter piece of filmmaking. I quite like it.
And I like Spielberg's remake of War of the Worlds. I think he takes it in a different direction entirely.
Yeah,
well, yeah, but
although,
the original is pure Cold War.
Yes,
and again,
absolutely.
suffers from crap monsters. Don't get me wrong, spaceships are fantastic, monsters are bollocks.
The original's pure Cold War, and the remake is pure post 9/11.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and I think it upset a lot of people. It wasn't the movie that they thought they were going to get to see. Whereas I thought it was a great movie, but
I thought it was a fantastic movie, yeah. And interesting, Tom Cruise plays such an unsympathetic character. He's not a hero at all. He basically legs it. He's useless. He runs away all the time. He's a shit father. It's interesting that he would take a role that was so unstarry for a big film star to take. But I thought it was a vastly underrated film.
Does Fargo count, the TV series? Is that a remake? Can you class that as a remake?
No, it's inspired by.
That's all I've got to say.
I'm done.
yeah, well, on that bombshell, that is unfortunately all we got time for this week. If you have your suggestions for the best movie remakes, then leave them below underneath this podcast in the podcast forum. Give us your suggestions, and if there's any decent ones, we'll probably discuss them in 2 weeks' time when we come back. But like I say, that's all we've got time for. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Things are going to get a hell of a lot worse before they get any better.
Mark Hodgkinson.
Don't argue with him.
Mark Botwright.
Cheating bitch.
Ed Selley.
Wait a second, sorry, I actually killed the tab whilst I was looking for something else.
I don't remember that.
That could be a quote.
I don't know who to trust.
Sorry, was that your quote?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark AVForums.com for latest news, reviews and video. And why not leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. Don't forget, we're not here next Wednesday. We'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.